Okay, I guess everyone like came in at like who is that? So welcome everyone on our like next seminar on science and peripheries. I am Franek. I am a member of Scholarly Communication Research Group, and I will be chairing today's seminar. And I'm really excited that we have David Mills with us today. David Mills is associate professor at the Department of Education at Oxford. He's also deputy director of the Oxford Center for Global Higher Education, which also have like a brilliant series of online seminar. David studied higher education, and his current research include the impact of the global research economy on institutional research and publishing cultures and in African universities. And what is like especially like interesting from the like also topic of our seminars, but also research that we are doing in Scholarly Communication Research Group, is that his work seeks to question the concept of predatory publishing and the way the term occurs the reputational inequalities of global knowledge ecosystems. And I can especially recommend his recent book that he co-published. It is titled Who Counts? Ghanaian Academic Publishing and Global Science. And I think it is research that was very needed in the discussion on predatory publishing. And it shows that to understand this phenomenon and like what exactly predatory publishing could actually means and what the discussion means, we need much more than some like blacklist of journals and like global quantitative perspective on the phenomenon, but rather we need to understand deeper historical background of publishing market in a given country. And in book he's doing it on example of Ghana. And I believe that the main advantage of this research in the overall discussion on predatory publishing, it is that David uses not only quantitative analysis of global publishing patterns, but also he uses ethnographic methods such as interviews and like participant observation. And because of that, he's able to go beyond like simplistic measurement of scale of phenomenon of predatory publishing and show how this category is understood by academics and how it influenced their everyday activities.
Great. Thank you very much, Franciszek. And thank you to the school. Have you finished? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Shall I start? Good. So thank you very much for the invitation to Christian, to Franciszek, Manuel, to all of you in Poznan. I've been really interested to get to know a bit more about your work and learn more about the history of Polish research on communications and its long history. It's a real pleasure to be here. As you say, I'm usually hosting or co-hosting seminars in Central Global Higher Education, so it's very nice to be talking to a different audience. This is work that I have been carrying out over the last few months. This is not the book, but it's work that we've been thinking together with Sefika Mertken and Gülen Eliester together around the idea of special issues. But I'm going to talk to it today. And the funny thing, of course, about ChatGPT and translation is that it was marketed as special editions, widespread retractions, ethical guardians, and the worldwide citation market, which is more or less right, but it's a slightly different version of this title. So we have translation to thank for that. I like the idea of special editions rather than special issues because it makes it sound even more exciting. So I'm going to try and talk for 40 minutes or so. This is what I am offering you as a sort of visual summary of the talk. Okay, so this is rather than telling you what I'm going to tell you, here's a little image. I'm trying to make sense of the whole academic publishing economy. Okay, it's a reputational economy, it's a prestige economy, it's a financial economy. I'm trying to understand how these things fit together, and in particular, the stresses it finds itself under, and the moments at which it seems to explode or become dysfunctional. It's an economy that's clearly driven by universities and the ways they incentivize their researchers, the careers of researchers themselves. The immediate outcomes of that productivity push are journal articles, and that brings prestige, that brings recognition, promotion, and as we have ever more researchers and ever more articles, then other things kick in around how we manage that flow of information and the role and power of the citation indexes in gatekeeping prestige and reputation. And then beyond that, a whole new collection of integrity, you could argue watchdogs or integrity issues that are generated by this system and its sort of complex flows and stresses and explosions occasionally. I'm not going to talk about what some people call predatory publishing. As Francesca said, I don't think that term is very helpful. It's quite an evocative. It's a very judgmental term, and I think what that term has done is shown us who's using it and why. I've written separately about that. I'm happy to answer questions on it, but that's not my focus today, and neither is my focus on gaming or fraud, and I'll explain why I'm not particularly interested in that. I'm interested in trying to understand the system as a whole. So this is one little visual, but let me get on into the paper that Sefika and Gülün and I are just finishing off and submitting. And of course, we haven't submitted it yet, so that your thoughts and comments today will be really helpful for us as we take it into publication ourselves. So let me move on and tell you a little bit about exponential curves. Some of you will know the name Derek de Solla Price. He was born in 1922 in East London. Born Derek Price, he took on his mother's name de Solla later on. He has been styled as a sort of herald of scientometrics. He went to University of London after first working in a physics lab. And what's interesting about him is he became very interested in the history of science. And there's this lovely story about him going to Singapore to the library there. And whilst he's in the library, he starts reading the philosophical transactions of the Royal Society. And he realizes that he piles up the volumes, that they seem to, if you order them chronologically, the pile seems to get bigger exponentially over time. So he begins to muse on why it is that science seems to be to have this sort of built-in exponentialism to it. Is this a scientific law? What's going on here? And he says science has always been modern. It's always been exploding into the population, always on the brink of an expansive revolution. Scientists have always felt awash in a sea of literature that augments in each decade as much as in all times before. So this feeling of being overwhelmed by the amount of science happening and the amount of publications isn't new. He's saying, but he's trying to understand what this means for where science might go. So you've got this wonderful log curve on the left, where he projects that by 2000 we're going to have 1 million journals, and that's done in 1963 in his book, Little Science, Big Science. His term Little Science, Big Science is he's trying to understand how in what's transforming about science to create this log relationship. Now, as we know, there aren't 1 million journals. Ulrich's Web probably suggests 160,000, but some of them are very big. And so we are interested in a story of expansion, and that's definitely one of my stories for today. We're interested in a story of the changing nature of academic publishing. We're interested in the way in which APCs in the particular moments of changing things again. And the story is also about special issues. And so today I'm interested in the way all these things come together. For me, it's not a story about the challenger publishers. You might have heard of MDPI, Frontiers, Hindawi. They have important roles in shaping this economy because of the ways in which they've introduced new business practices. But again, I'm not trying to judge them. I'm interested in how the system is changing as a whole. And so what we're trying to do in this paper is to tell the story through some close-up analyses of four journals that have been published by one of the big 5 publishers. Okay, so I'm going to come to those and tell you a bit about how we've unpacked that story. But I wanted to start with de Sola Price, because he reminds us that that this is not a new story of expansion. He became very good friends with Eugene Garfield. He became interested in what might happen next. And there's this lovely quote from him saying that it's clear we can't carry on like this. We cannot go up another 2 orders of magnitudes as we've climbed the last 5. If we did, we should have 2 scientists for every man, woman, child, and dog in the population. And we should spend on them twice as much money as we had. Scientific doomsday is less than a century distant. So I'm not sure whether we're closer to scientific doomsday now than we were in 1963. But what we're trying to understand then is what's happening right now and where the system might go next. So some of you will have heard of the publisher MDPI, founded in 1996, and grew very rapidly after establishing an open access publishing model. It was founded in Switzerland, now based there as well. And it's particularly had success in a model that relies on special issues. And so there's obviously another little exponential curve for us. And this is data that's been analyzed by the economist Paolo Crosetto and his blog. Very interesting. And you see an exponential increase, primarily driven by special issues. And this has carried on. So 2023, apparently there are 3,500 special issues in one journal alone being with an open date in 2023, an MDPI journal, which means there's equivalent to 9 special issues each day. Now, not all of them will get published. Not all of them will come to light. It's a business model. It's a model by which they are able to attract scholars to come together and publish. And I have a student who was asking me yesterday, should she submit a paper to a special issue on education and homelessness in an MDPI journal? And we had an interesting conversation about it, because I could see from her perspective, this could be a great way of getting a publication quite quickly. It would link her into a community. So I understand, and I think we all need to recognize the value that special issues play in science, in bringing people together, in enabling a conversation that's often cutting edge, to bring some focus to a debate. So this is not a moment to say this is the wrong business model. MDPI has been very successful by its speed to publication. It's introduced some quite transparent reviewing. So this is where trying to judge publishers and journals isn't particularly helpful. And I think Dan Brockington's blogs are useful on this. He writes, publishing houses need to be assessed along a spectrum of behaviors around transparency, profitability, exclusivity, giving back, citation and self-citation, responsibility, and so on. And he says that analyzing MDPI, yes, their rejection rates have gone down a bit. They were about 55%, now they're a bit under 50%. He says their position's evolving, but it hasn't changed category. So I think that's interesting, that actually people who observe this stuff closely recognize that this is just one publisher in a spectrum of publishers, and whether it can continue in this model, what its future lies. I mean, there have been some increasing attention to it and worries about it. But again, that's not really my project here to sort of comment on this one publisher. What we're interested in here is how this model is being taken up, and because it's had to be, because it's been so successful financially. MDPI published 240,000 articles last year. That's not far behind Elsevier, and Elsevier is the biggest publisher. So the question then is, how is this model, this APC-led model of open access publishing, being taken up across the what you might call legacy publishers, or the big 5? And the evidence, of course, is that they are all recognizing the value of special issues and perhaps encouraging their journals to grow. Within an open access environment, it does make sense to facilitate growth where possible. So even the Royal Society, that august scholarly society, the first, also wants you to be a guest editor for its special issues. So this is obviously part of the new publishing economy. This is how publishing is now working. And as part of that also, Christos Petrou has done some excellent analysis of speed. Over the last 10 years, the average time to production has reduced. This would be less sort of significant if you took out MDPI. MDPI has been a big player in that, but all of the publishers are trying to move towards a faster turnaround time. Now, I would sort of point out here, and this is really helpful, this extra graph, that actually this is very divided by field, such that if you go down to the bottom left of this graph, the sciences are the places where there's been the most speeding up, and already they are the place where the time to TAT stands for time to submission, to time from submission to publication, and so you can see at the bottom left the journals that are speeding up, and at the top right the journals that haven't changed, or possibly even getting a little bit slower, and they already were slow. I think this graph is really helpful because it tells us that science is very varied. There are very many different approaches. There is a value in going slowly. It's not all about going fast. Those of you who've submitted a journal article and it's taken 2 years or 3 years because there's been some really thorough peer review, that's the value of the editorial process in improving the quality or developing people's work. So this is not simply a story about everyone going faster and everything getting less peer review. It's a complex system, as one would expect. Science is very diverse. But I think the point here is more that there is, on general, a push towards trying to speed up the process. Now, there is an emerging literature which is getting quite big now on what one might call gaming. That the metrics that we all now live with in a Nordic culture have encouraged us to play clever games. And this title of this book, Gaming the Metrics, is an example of that. And they suggest, the editors in particular suggests, that actually this has gone beyond tweaking. I'm not sure when a tweak is a tweak, but they say it's gone beyond tweaking to create metric enhancing evidence, such as citations to one's work. I mean, you could argue we've always cited to ourselves, and it's about the level of which one cites. But their position is that this is what they call a bureaucratic crime. It's manipulating the system. It's a misconduct, and it's a real problem for the integrity of science. Not everyone in this collected edition that MIT published a couple of years ago agrees, and I'll come back to why and how people don't support this position, which is a sort of normative judgment position. But there are certainly many people out there who are very keen to pursue the questions that this question of gaming raises and where it might go. So I'm interested in, very much in who's doing the accusing and where those accusations are happening and their role. I've written elsewhere about Retraction Watch. I think that that's very interesting. It's a journalist organization that is funded by a private philanthropy and is very much trying to raise the profile of journals that are attracting articles, often in not a very transparent way, often in a very slow way, and often only as a result of sleuths, people calling out either on an online forum like PubPeer, or publishing blogs about what they see as problematic practices within journals. And so I think Retraction Watch has forced the system to come to terms with its dysfunctionality. So I'm not judging them either, but they are now significant actors within the field, within the system, and they play an important an interesting role in forcing publishers to take the accountability issues they take seriously. So they have attended to and written about a couple of the issues that the journals that we're talking about in our own research. But we're in order to do what we've done, we've anonymized our journals. We could also talk about COPE and its role in trying to promote integrity. I'm not going to go into all the many blogs. There is a sort of netherworld of sleuths and blogs and posts. Some of them more evidence-based than others, some sort of getting into fights and counterfights. It can all get a bit murky. But here's an example, one which is sort of highlighting, and it is an anonymous writer, so a lot of it's anonymous as well, because people are worried about their research careers, which is trying to get into the case of how brokers in China are enabling, particularly medical doctors who are forced to get a qualification, an article, to get published, to get the work published that they haven't written. So obviously you could call this paper mill. I'm not that, and I don't particularly want to get into the fraud aspect. I'm interested in the system as a whole. So then why am I not jumping down on these terms like ghost authorship, coercive citation, fake peer reviews? The one I came across recently was citation plantation, which I rather liked. These are interesting labels. They are labels that go places and do things. My worry about them is that they tell us about the sort of the surface effects of what the system is producing. They don't tell us about the systemic way in which the system works. They're telling us about the sort of side effects, you could argue, or the sort of superficial consequences of a structural system that's built in a way that encourages acceleration and productivism. So if we look at Marianne Jacobs, she says, it doesn't pay attention to the systemic features. And Beek et al. This is an anthropologist who gives us a quote that, it's important to work out who's accusing who of being fake. That does tell us something very much about the way in which we create the notions of the fake and the non-fake. And in a paper that Kirsten Bell wrote and I co-authored, so I'm citing myself here, the fake peer review discourse has been instrumental in reasserting the boundaries between science and society and reaffirming the ideological significance of so-called genuine pre-pub peer review. So one of the things going on here is that this integrity infrastructure is reinforcing a sense of this is proper science, this is improper science, this is how to do it, this isn't how to do it. And I think that's interesting, but we need to go beyond beyond that to think about how the system itself is working. So this is coming to our own research, and this starts off with Sefika and Gulin in dialogue with me. We were thinking about what the pressures are on researchers to publish in contexts which might not necessarily be the contexts that encourage high quality research. And we just start discussing a social science journal that it is a research methods journal. It's a broad interdisciplinary research methods journal that seems to have suddenly expanded and produced some special issues where, by our analysis, the papers were out of scope. They didn't really fit the remit of the journal. And then we began to look elsewhere at other journals, and these are all journals published by one of the big five, as they call them. And they all had, and some of them still have, Scopus indexing. So these are reputable journals that some have long histories, 80s, 60s, at least 10 years old, and they all have been indexed. And the same patterns are visible in all of them, which is special issues provide a means for them to expand their publication volume. And in some cases, quite strikingly so. They're different in size, they're different in mandate, they're different in fields. They have different models for how they handle their growth. Some of it have a set of topical chief editors. That's quite a common model within MDPI, where you don't just have one small editorial team, but you have many associate editors who will be responsible for say, an individual special issue or group of issues or themes. So what's interesting about these four, and we go into some detail in them in our paper, is that a couple of them have been sort of exposed by Retraction Watch or by other sort of integrity sort of watchers on PubPeer. And as a result, publishers have either retracted articles or put in place new guidelines for dealing with special issues. And some of these retractions have been slow. Some of them had a lot of attention. But not every issue, or not every journal in this four has had that. So what's interesting here then is a question of, probably there are other examples like this of journals that were very attractive for people to try and publish in because of their index status and because it seemed relatively easy and quick and possible to do so. And so then we thought, well, let's try and talk to the authors concerned, because of course, you know, it's one thing looking at a journalistic expose. It's another thing looking at the journal website itself and trying to make sense of the data. And we would say that it's actually quite hard to discern sometimes which of these journals had published special issues, where the special issue was, that the signaling, the labeling isn't very clear sometimes. And sometimes a special issue, the sort of introduction by a guest editor doesn't mention all the articles that have been published in the issue. So there was all sorts of quite complicated things going on in the ways in which these issues are being accepted. And some of the publishers have focused on that. They've acknowledged that they've got problems and sometimes they've accused criminals of hacking into emails and or very faking guest editor roles in order to submit things. I mean, it's very hard to know, but that's why we thought we'd talk to people. So what did the authors we spoke to say? Well, actually, as you might guess, it was really, really hard to talk to people. People didn't want to talk, and we sent a lot of emails. This is sensitive, difficult terrain, and we did speak to a couple of people, but you know, I wanted to emphasize here just how tricky it is to do research in this area that's empirical, that's grounded. At the start, Francesca referred to the work that I've been doing in Ghana, and we had managed to get academics to talk about their publishing journeys, but sometimes there's shame there. Sometimes there's embarrassment that journals they're published in have subsequently been seen as not acceptable. And so that, this is, you have to tread very carefully. But we did talk to some people in the end, and a theme that did come up was sometimes confusion, and people saying, well, how could it be published so fast? So people worried about what had happened, and that's a reflection of people not always being aware that the publishing speeds have speeded up, and the journals vary very hugely. I mean, MDPI's average publication time is 38 days. I mean, we can think of journals that take years. So then there was quite a lot of interest in what's going on here for the special issues. Is it about money? Are the guest editors buying the issues? In a couple of contexts, we'd heard of people who were encouraged to submit papers by their supervisors. And so there's some situations where supervisors would help students. So there's a whole range of ways and reasons and logics by which people are finding themselves encouraged, perhaps forced, expected to submit papers to a special issue in order to make it happen. We also spoke to editors and publishers. And again, it was difficult, but we did speak to one editor who admitted that there had been concerns in his journal. He'd come in as a result of those concerns, and he'd introduced a lot more tight oversight of special issues. And I think this will be generally the case across the sector. Publishers are having to be far more interventionist and proactive. They're recognizing that actually they're vulnerable because of the pressures or the possibilities that special issues enable. So they're introducing tighter protocols. A lot of talk of AI as a way of detecting sort of unexpected behavior. Certainly Scopus, the index itself, has lots of metrics it uses, probably machine learning metrics to spot patterns that are unexpected. And so what one sees here then is a whole attempt at trying to stop the consequences of journal special issues that are published in a way that either are flagrantly sort of out of scope, as in don't fit, or in occasional and extreme terms, some of these papers were published that just didn't make sense. They were AI generated. So there are integrity directors, there are integrity units in many of the publishing companies, and they are often issuing press releases and trying to do things. Now, my question here then is, where does this all get us to? And this is a quote from James Grissomere, who's a philosopher of science, in the same volume I introduced earlier on gaming, by Agilio and Lippmann. And he writes, well, the only way to deploy a metric as an evaluation standard without violating Goodhart's law, and remember Goodhart's law is, if you create a measure, it becomes a target, is that strategy will only have, is the only way to do it is to keep it secret, but actually that doesn't work because academics are clever and they'll find some way of solving the puzzle. So we've got this challenge here then is, there is a sort of an issue, which is the special issues have become sites of vulnerability for journals, sites of profit as well, but also vulnerability. And therefore we're creating this whole integrity infrastructure around them. And here's an example of why this matters, is because, this is again from Christos Petrou, when you're delisted from Web of Science, you're far less likely to get submissions. This is the appeal for researchers and for editors of publishing in a journal that's indexed in a Web of Science or Scopus. It's reputationally prestigious and therefore commercially very profitable for the publisher to accept submissions. So yes, to come back to Grissomere then, he says, well, isn't this an example of an arms race? That rather than framing it as a question of misconduct, let's think about what happens when you think of it as misconduct. If you think of it as misconduct, then you're accepting that the system of a metrics-based system is the conduct. Okay, we have to work within a system that demands measurement by performance, by numbers of productivity, and then by doing so, that entrenches the metrics as standards. And so either, but then the argument he would make would be that the gaming becomes an expected part of that system. Okay, you have to then, you have no choice. You have to perform to what the metrics require you to do. So then this leads then to a sort of, a productivist logic where everyone's got no choice but to sort of join the arms race. And the arms race is one of metrics. It's the integrity technology sort of tries to improve, and then the gaming gets more clever. But the gaming is the wrong word, because the system, this is just part of what it means to participate in the system. So because gaming sort of suggests you're breaking the system, whereas actually this is the system itself. So I think that's sort of where I'm trying to get to in my analysis and in the paper. And what I haven't talked about much here, but I'm happy to talk in response to questions, is how and in the ways in which this plays out in unequal ways across a global system that is unequal. Okay, that we can focus on certain countries and say, well, look, point fingers, these are places where people are most likely to be submitting to poor quality special issues. But I think rather than pointing fingers at countries, we need to understand how the system is stratified and how the core periphery relationships work within that system. And I know that's very much a theme for this research group. And how, for those people at the peripheries, wherever they are, of reputation, of prestige, of institutional security. So if you're a junior scholar, if you're a precarious scholar, the choices are pretty limited. It's much harder for you to understand how to access the elite networks. It makes more sense to try and to use productivism as a strategy to survive. So you're more likely to publish more. It's going to be appealing to take the options that a faster publisher will offer, possibly a special issue, possibly it's harder for you to assess the quality of that process. And perhaps if you are on the periphery, then it is about volume primarily. And so acceleration is totally a survival strategy that makes sense. Now, I'm not saying that everything is speeding up. There's clearly a way in which there's a lot of slow science still going on out there, and that is often linked to elite science. And you can see a way in which if you publish a brilliant book with Oxford University Press that takes 10 years and then becomes an important book, that's fine. That the academia enables that. But to do that, you have to have the security and probably the cultural capital that elite academia enables. At the same time, we're seeing a university and research system that is being commodified through its publishing and built on APC income growth. And that seems to be sort of particularly enabled by special issues. So where I'm ending then is there doesn't seem to be a way out of this, what you might call integrity technology arms race. And perhaps it's a dead end in its current form. And perhaps then we need to move beyond metrics, find a way of repairing the damage that sort of metrics dominated system is creating. And it's about other ways of valuing and evaluating research. It might be about evaluating and rewarding peer review much more than evaluating publishing. It might be trying to sort of get rid of metrics in this form and think about other ways of supporting a research ecosystem. And I think this matters because I don't think the system is going to change in its current form. And I think the stratification is going to increase. But that's our thoughts. As I say, I'm really happy to answer questions on any of the themes that we've touched on. Here's a little summary. It's been about the main journals, is not about the challenger journals. It's been about the high profile, what they call batch retractions, what you might learn from them about the ways in which special issues have become so key to this economy. And our focus then in on a few journals and a few case studies and putting them into dialogue through conversations. We'd like to have done more. I mean, I think the ideal would be to have even more insight into the pressures on everyone concerned. And just to emphasize here again, we're all in this. Okay, I think we're all part of the system that we need to understand our complicities within it. But those on the margins have the fewest choices, and that's where productivism seems to be a survival strategy. And at that, I'll stop and really look forward to comments, thoughts, questions.
Yes, thank you very much, David, for this really interesting presentation. Now I will open for the questions, and I encourage everyone who has a question to raise his or her hand or to write a comment. Yeah, and I see Kuba, but I will start with one question I had, and then I will just let people speak. So I had one question for you, David, because it was really interesting. It was really interesting presentation, but I had like one question that I'm also like asking myself when studying like this discussion on predatory publishing and current research publishing market. I was wondering, when I fully agree with you that the discussion on predatory journals or like this gaming metrics, etc., they like mislocate the source of the trouble. Like they seek like source of the trouble in some like very regional, maybe not the best journals, but they usually overlook like the whole system. And you are arguing like to move away from this like judgmental label. But do you think like we need maybe some other label to like really think about like changing the publishing system? Because like I agree that we need to understand that people are just like using survival strategy, but I also think we need to find the ways to go beyond only surviving in the systems. Yeah, and do you think like what kind of label that could be? Like at the end you were mentioning being against like metrics, so maybe it is like metricization, or yeah.
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? So I guess people will use labels. I can't stop people using labels. what's interesting is which labels get circulated and why, and the work they do. And I think when you start looking at you know, a label like predatory publishing, it begins to fall apart quite quickly, doesn't it? Because journals can go in and out of an index. They can become more or less sort of reputable. They can you know, go from being a sort of startup scrappy to being very, very respected very quickly. And the challenge, of course, is that you know, as that quote from Dan Brockington put it, you know, they're all on a spectrum. So your question really is one around what labels, what can we do? How do we move beyond metrics, as if possible? I think probably the reality is that the field of metrics is going to carry on as an influential research field. It's probably about how funders use those metrics, okay? And if one could imagine a situation where universities realized that actually, so in the case of Ghana, universities in Ghana require a very particular number of publications from each researcher at each stage of publication. And if you put those into place in precise terms, you have to add up, and it works out at, you need to have, you know, almost 70 or 80 articles that can make full professor. That does encourage a whole way of thinking about research. So it's about that use of metrics that distorts institutional cultures, institutional research cultures, that seems to me the problem. And Eugene Garfield recognized that. I mean, he was very clever early on. He saw the dangers of this. And even, you know, in a dialogue with Robert Merton, you know, they very early on, they said, well, look, you know, what's the risks of these metrics? So I think that's my point really is, we're going to carry on being able to measure things. It's about what people do with those measures.
Yeah, thanks very much. And now we can go on to other questions. Kuba was first, I believe.
All right, thank you, David. It was a very interesting presentation. I would like to sort of follow up on the front question because and ask you about this theme of beyond metrics, because me and Christian and one of our colleagues from Germany, we are researching institutions that try to go beyond metrics, but what we actually find out is those institutions are already are the ones which are already prestigious in a sense that they build through history their reputation. They are already established research institutions. So we lack cases, you know, from different than central contexts regarding any attempts of going beyond metrics. And I was wondering when I was listening to your presentation whether in your research, you found some examples of trying to go beyond metrics, not in central institutions, but in those systems that we usually refer to as semi-peripheral or peripheral in that sense. Have you seen any practice that in your perception could be somehow interpreted as some trend towards going beyond metrics? All right, thank you very much.
No, that's a great question, and I think the very fact I haven't confirms your hypothesis that it's going to be the elite institutions that are already secure or somewhat secure in their reputation, that they can say, well, look, you know, you can judge us on metrics, but actually we are confident enough in our sense of identity. So, you know, I can look at a Nigerian university that's very new, that's a private university that's come very quickly up to the top of the ranks in Nigeria by requiring its researchers to acquire impact factors and by publishing in Scopus journals. So actually, I think it's the inverse, it's the corollary of what you're saying, is that if you're on the periphery, then it matters even more that you are able to play the metrics in order to position yourself within that peripheral research ecosystem. And you can see that very quickly within somewhere like Nigeria. where this private university has gone, within 10 years to being the most intensive research university compared to all the state public universities. So yeah, I think I think it's really interesting that you're doing that. You're thinking, let's look at examples of institutions that are trying to move beyond metrics. And there are clearly a lot of incentives for them to do so in trying to improve research culture. And they've got lots of, there's lots of well-meaning declarations that will help them. But yes, I mean, that will be a great study. Really interesting. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So now Suming have a question.
Yeah, so actually I have two, I'll ask the bigger question first.
Yeah.
And really it's around this rejection or this desire not to go into the predatory label.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't make sense to talk about this journal versus that journal, this type of journal versus that as predatory. Mm-hmm. Partly because the rationale for not using that label being, that the more marginalized and more precarious people need them and need to publish in them, and they provide the means for very precarious people to become slightly less precarious. But I think that there's something that we're losing. Mm-hmm. Maybe we shouldn't use the term predatory, but we are putting all the focus on the academics themselves and what they have to do, either to game it to succeed or to game it to survive. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And undoubtedly, there's some harmful trends that are happening, acceleration, extractivism, and overwork, and maybe compromising quality and integrity of the research too. And I wonder, and there isn't enough focus, I think, being put on, what the source of this acceleration is. So it is, so it's partly, you don't know whether the hamster has to run faster because the wheel is going faster, or the wheel is going faster because the hamster is running faster, and that's making the wheel go faster. And somewhere I think we are also losing the incredible greed of the large publishers. That is definitely a factor. That they've gone from greed not really being a very important motivation to greed being the most important motivation, and a revenue extraction going from being, a slight motivation to revenue extraction being the major motivation, even for what we consider to be very, non-predatory or respectable journals. So that was my first thing. My second smaller question was about special issues. Given that special issues are the main tool through which this whole problematic system is accelerating, does this mean that special issues are now kind of finished as a scholarly mechanism? Because I myself, as a more senior scholar, have a lot of problems now with, being asked to do special issues or even doing them, even though I'm still participating in them, because they still have a really important scholarly function, which complements what a journal does, which is to tell us what's happening in a field, but it doesn't tell us about topics within a field or help us to congregate around special topics in the field. And now the corruption of special issues has meant that the whole tool of special issues seems to be finished for us. So that's the two. Sorry for being verbose.
No, there's something that was really interesting comments. And I love the idea of, does the hamster turn the wheel or does the wheel turn the hamster? I think you're right about the sort of the commercial logics of the share price, of the shareholders, of the failed IPOs, that of the sort of, Elsevier's worry about its reputation within the market. That this is whether how much greed is too much greed, I don't know, but I certainly think you're right that there is a scaling up of a logic of extraction, and that's why, of course, these major publishers are just as predatory as a small publisher that is. So at one level, the unfortunate thing about the sort of call for open access and the shift to open access is that it has mainstreamed a model of revenue generation for journals that encourages a very different approach to the research workflow, doesn't it? And I get that, and so I think at that level, that's what we need to sort of try and think about is how do we move beyond a publishing model that's APC driven to, you know, the ideal would be a sort of sustainable diamond open access model where, you know, libraries and universities would fund research journals. But that's the answer, isn't it? That seems to me to be where we get to. So, but your particular question was around special issues. I don't think they're broken. I mean, I think they're only broken as much as the whole system is broken. I think that clearly there's a worry about them. That they're still going to carry on being really valuable. And so, you know, there's a long history to special issues. You can go back to the earliest years of the Royal Society, and they were publishing special issues in the 80s and so on. They are a way of bringing together a theme of articles. They enable rapid sort of push forward of a debate. I think what's interesting about them is that we haven't thought about them enough sociologically as a space for both, you know, making knowledge and also breaking knowledge. And I think that's my point really is let's actually do a bit more thinking about what's going on in a special issue, why it's appealing, why you still need to be part of them, but also why and how they've become such a vulnerable part of the process, if that helps. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. And now Martin, have a question?
Yes, thank you very, very much. Thank you, David. I very much enjoyed that you sort of took the labeling approach route and sort of asked more who's labeling, why they're labeling, what's the process, what's the effects of this. What you alluded to as being sort of an integrity arms race, if I can rephrase it like that. Others have called it the reform movement, right, in science. I recently have thought about sort of what this does to the individuals, right, to the individual scientists and the sort of the difficult situation it puts them into. And one of the ambivalences I seem to see, and I wonder what you think about this, is that sort of this focus on integrity and problematic publication practices, but also sort of Papier and other platforms sort of problematizing individual papers, individual authors, right? It's sort of may instill a fear in scientists, right? So if I publish, I'm in danger, right? I have put things out in the public and somebody's now going to control them, maybe even with sort of automatic tools, and I won't have a say as soon as something like this gets out in the public, because then I'm slandered, I'm labeled, and I'm in a defensive position. So what do I do to sort of preempt such a thing happening? I cannot not publish, right? That's not an option. So one option is publish more, right? Put out as much material out there, sort of hope that if something comes up that might be problematic, either it drowns in the large amount of stuff that I put out, but also maybe the other stuff that might be fine counterbalances and sort of improves my position in such a problematic situation if it should happen. And for that, open science is the perfect sort of science policy narrative, right? Open science really sort of not just says put out more into the open, but put smaller stuff into the open. So publish your data sets, publish whatever you have, right? But there's a discrepancy or a conflict or an ambivalence between putting more things out to be more secure, you could say, but also to increase quality or to prevent things not being integral. So how do you think about this sort of problematic dynamic for individuals? Because that might be beyond sort of business models and stuff like that. That might be sort of an engine that runs irrespective of who profits of this, right?
I mean, yeah, I think that's sort of what I was trying to say, but you've said it very well, Martin, that actually it's not simply, I mean, you know, perhaps I haven't emphasized that enough. Clearly, the universities are encouraging a culture of publishing, and it might be that you're right, that individuals are thinking, right, well, some of these things aren't going to work, so therefore let's just get it out there. The open science movement does encourage us to think about our data being, useful. I think we're all being encouraged to recognize that there's a value in sharing knowledge, and there are more spaces to do so. So I think your point about is this, because I think your point is around this might just be simply something coming from an individual researcher, and they're saying, right, well, look, what do I lose by getting my stuff out there? And so it's been driven partly by that possibility that's been opened up. Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think it probably would vary by field, again, wouldn't it? It would vary, and there is a sort of way in which it's one response. And it's a bit like the amplification of social media, isn't it? Somehow, if in doubt, get on social media and say, look at me. And so by that logic, the more you tweet, the more you blog, you get more attention, you get more likes. It's the same logic. So I think we are in that, and that's what you're helpfully pointing to, which is not simply an institutional driver. It is the current psychodrama of contemporary social media. So yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. So Zehra have a comment also.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David, for this amazing presentation. I like it very much. I'm wondering how we can handle the acceptance of central countries' prestige and superiority, because as a scholar working in a peripheral country, I wrote an article with Emmanuel and Franek, and we conclude that the problem is not predatory publishing, the problem is the unequal state of the academia. But all three reviewers warn us that this is not a good conclusion. We should make it softer, and we should do it because we want to be accepted by the central scholars. But you, as a scholar working in Oxford University, you can say it in your articles. Even in my country, if I decided to go London universities to make a sabbatical, my university accepted. But if I decide to go in Nigeria to work on enhancing water wells in Nigeria, it is not accepted because there are no universities in top 100 universities. This is the main problem of the academia, but we as scholars working in peripheral countries, we cannot handle this. It is impossible for all of us that going to Oxford University and make our arguments. We should change something, but I don't know what is it. This is my question. I know there is no correct answer to it, but
Zara, it's a great. You've absolutely called it out, and thank you for doing that. I should have said that. I mean, I'm obviously I'm in a very elite institution. I have the freedom to do this, and no one has called me out for working with scholars who are in less elite institutions, because I'm lucky, because I have a relatively high degree of autonomy. Now, what do I do about that? Well, I try and work with people who I find interesting and who are at the very different end of a global higher education, because it's very easy for us in Oxford to write about global higher education as if that is an elite network of elite institutions that sustain a system. And the notion of the global looks very different if you're in a new private university in Nigeria. So yeah, Sarah, thank you very much for saying that. And I think perhaps what we all need to do is ideally we find ways of publishing stuff in places that doesn't simply force us to conform to the way in which the elite system encourages us to think, which might mean writing and setting up new journals, which of course then creates the whole problem of how those journals are treated. But yeah, no, thank you very much. That's really interesting. I noticed I haven't responded to a couple of questions in the chat actually. Francesca, Yusuf asked about why special issues, and I think you asked there have been some answers in there as well. But I think you're right that a special issue is a way for especially the editors to get a publication from the editorial. There's cross citations. Probably the peer review process might be a bit more gentle, because you know each other. You work together, you sort of support each other, so probably you're less likely to sort of use that harsh peer reviewer to sort of dismiss an article. But I mean, it does create issues. I mean, I in the scholarly association that I'm a treasurer of, the editors of a journal, they do struggle with the sort of balance between rigorous peer review of special issues and the autonomy given to a guest editor. So I think some of this is not new, the challenges and the appeals of special issue editing. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. So now Paolo also has a question.
Okay, so thank you. I just joined at the last minute, so I don't know. So I did the last 3 slides, and I think it's the right crowd to say. I just wanted to say thank you for what you do, even if I didn't see it all. And I wanted to make a little announcement because you dropped the name of Dan Brockington, and so myself, Dan Brockington, and other people, we are working on a huge data gathering and a paper about all these publication issues. You might know that I have a blog post about MDPI special issues that was around for some time. And so we are working on a new paper that will come out soon about with really a lot of data. And we really take this label approach too. So it was independent. So thanks. So I don't know the details because they came in late, but it looks like we go in the same direction. And I would just like to stress the fact that I think the problem stems from the fact that the label owners are some specific people, and then they try to maximize their revenue. And if I just bounce back why special issues are important, I just got an email from Elsevier, which they asked, so from a colleague that was invited by Elsevier to run a special issue. And they say, run a special issue for us. A special issue get 20% more citations. They get 30% more downloads. So they have these metrics. And I think this comes from the fact that they actually tap into our networks more, and then they can exploit our work more. So, it's not really a question because I don't know what to ask because I came a year late, but a bit of an announcement, and thank you for the work you're doing.
So Paolo, thank you very much. And if you'd been here earlier, you'd have seen I generously discussed that blog you did. It was really helpful. It made me realize just quite how important what was going on was. So I did know you were doing something with Dan. I wasn't quite sure what. So if you go back later on and watch the slides, I've got that visual of your MDPI exponential curve. And I also have a visual from the Elsevier why publish a special issue with us, which absolutely lists the reason, which is the citation increases. So I should have mentioned that is in the slides. Blatant sense of, okay, you do this in order because you benefit from citations. So your paper sounds really interesting, and I think the data sets that you're putting together will be great. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. The seminar is recorded, so recording will be available like few days after the seminar. And Christian also have a next question.
I would like to start from a short thank you to Paolo for his blog post and his work on MDPI, to take this opportunity to see him in person. Really useful stuff. Looking forward to the paper. But going back to our discussions, I would say like I was thinking about one element of the general picture of publishing market and general publishing infrastructure, or maybe ecology, that is missing from the discussion about gaming the metrics and the problems that we have by the phenomenon, is the state policy of evaluation. It's like maybe in some Anglophone countries like US and UK, where evaluation policy is more or less a matter of individual universities, not so clear. But when we go to socialist East, the state as a player that imposes metric gaming logic on academics, and it's really hard to be ignored, is also a crucial factor. So I wonder how this factor, like in your thinking about like geopolitics of special issues phenomenon play out. And I would say like I would like to mention that this is also nicely tackled issue in Emmanuel's recent book, like coming from our context where state is like a actor responsible for imposition of this madness. Emmanuel addressed the issue quite well. Interesting. So I'm really interested in how this play out in your analysis.
It's a great question, Christian. And I've been thinking a bit about why it is, for example, that South Africa has such an elaborate research evaluation system and a well-funded research subsidy system, such that, you know, within sub-Saharan Africa, it's, you know, it has a long history of you know, very, I mean, obviously that's linked to its colonial history as well, but it's very much linked to its apartheid history of worrying about being isolated, and the apartheid state very much sort of supported science as a way of protecting itself and its military capabilities and its research capabilities. And so therefore you see now this incredibly elaborate publication incentive and financial subsidy system that has all sorts of, you know, really quite strange consequences for South African research, but also a huge volume of research that's being produced by South African researchers. So I think you know, that doesn't directly answer your question around Poland, but perhaps it's an interesting comparator, which is, what is it about these states that are concerned about the geopolitics of survival in the context of big neighbors, that recognize the importance of measuring and facilitating science and infrastructural development as a means to protecting you know, national interests, and then therefore develop these incredibly elaborate scientific based evaluation systems. Is that what's going on? Possibly. I mean, you know, I wonder whether, you know, that there is an element there of, as you say, geopolitics.
Yes, I would say so. Thank you very much for your answer.
Yeah, and Emmanuel also had a question.
Thank you, Fran. Again, thank you, David, for very inspiring presentation. I would like to refer to one of the phrases you mentioned several times, that is going beyond metrics, because it's often presented as the way of improving our situation in academia. For me, frankly speaking, it's utopia, because our modern society is built on metrics, and there has never been a university or academia without some kind of metrics. Just there has never been an ivory tower in science, and it's just academia without metrics is just inconsistent with history. And there has been always some metrics used to count publications. When I refer to always, I mean at least 2 centuries, at least in our part of Europe. However, and I combine this comment with a question regarding special issues, is what has changed is that these publication metrics have been appropriated by corporations and publishers. And some reflection regarding this special issues and proliferation of special issues. A couple of years ago, in the conference of the International Society of Scientometrics and Informetrics, there were several presentations showing that publishers are not interested anymore in special issues, that the special issues just died for the academic communities. However, it was now we see that the special issue was reinvented by some biggest commercial publishers, which are not well connected with academic society. So, David, do you think that cutting off in our regular work from corporations, that is commercial publishers, companies making university rankings, might be one of the solutions, maybe not going beyond metrics, but going beyond poor metrics?
Yeah, great question, Emmanuel. I mean, it's not just about the metrics, and yes, I'm sure you're right that Charles Darwin was interested in who was reading his books, and there's a lovely piece about a special issue that was produced just before he published his book on natural selection, which was to rush some ideas out that he'd written. So you're right, this is not new. What I probably haven't emphasized enough probably here is the pivotal role that a particular set of metrics that the citation indexes produce have on the system, such that it's not all the metrics, it's the power of those indexes to gatekeep a certain set of metrics, isn't it? So, and not every journal is included in those indexes, and who's in and who's out becomes the key issue. Then you ask, okay, how can we move away from the wrong metrics? Would a move towards a less commercial system help? I think you're right. I think it would. I think if one was to, and we know, as I mentioned, a scholarly association I'm treasurer of, we flipped our journal away from a big 5 publisher, and now there's less incentive for us to sort of to maximize journal volume. And quite the opposite. The pressures on the editors are quite heavy enough. It suits them to slim down the journal, because it's no longer counting towards that journal and that publisher's profit margins. So yes, I absolutely think that a move towards a community-owned model of sustainable open access would take some of that pressure off. And so we're beginning to see some of that happen. I'm hoping that the more we realize what's gone wrong, the more it's possible to move towards that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, we are heading to the end of the seminar, but maybe someone would have like last or two last questions. Also, maybe someone who was active in the chat would also speak in person. Okay, if not, I guess we can conclude. Can
I just say, thank you all for the chat. I'm reading carefully. There's some really interesting comments in here. Thanks, Suming, thanks, Lynn and Christian. Lots to think with here, and thank you all for your questions. It's been really interesting.
Yes, thank you all for the discussion. I guess we highlighted like at least two main themes in them, which was also like really interesting in David's presentation. One is this phenomenon of like increasing publishing in special issues and how it affects like current publishing market as a system, not as like some misconduct or something like that. And the other was the issue of actually what to do with that, and what are alternatives, which I guess from the discussion is still a hard question, and the answers are not always clear. But I like hope that like continuing this discussion and understanding how system works can help us to formulate this is more clear further on. So thank you all for the attendance. Christian in the chat provided links to our newsletter and our Twitter, I guess, when you can have further information on further seminars, or in our group. We will have quite a lot of seminars in May, in 15, 16, and 17 of May, I guess. And you can find information about that both on our website and especially on our Twitter account. So thank you all for the attendance. Thank you once again, David, for your presentation and discussion, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. See you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Farah. Bye-bye.
Thank you.